What happens when India looks the world's biggest superpower straight in the eye and simply says a no? Why would India reject a U.S. deal that promised influence, money, and power? Is this confidence a risky gamble or the start of a brand new world order? Could this be the moment America realizes it can't call all the shots anymore? And most importantly, what does this mean for global politics, for alliances, and for the balance of power between East and West? Stay with me, because by the end, you'll see why this one decision might shake the entire planet. India's decision to say a no to the United States didn't come out of nowhere, but the way it happened left the world stunned. For years, America has been positioning itself as India's close friend, pouring resources, promises, and partnerships into the relationship. Washington believed it had India figured out, a reliable ally in Asia, a counterbalance to China, and a partner that would eventually align with U.S. interests whenever the stakes got high. But then came that one moment when New Delhi refused to play along. What everyone expected to be a handshake deal turned into a firm rejection, and suddenly the U.S. realized India was not going to be another country in its pocket. That single word, a no, carried more weight than 1,000 diplomatic speeches. It was bold, it was defiant, and it was a reminder that India will not compromise its independence for short-term benefits. Think about it. Most countries, when approached by the United States with an attractive deal, would hesitate before turning it down. There's power, money, and global influence at stake. But India flipped the script. It wasn't just about rejecting terms on paper. It was about rejecting the idea that America still has the final say in world affairs. This is where the story becomes bigger than just India and the U.S. It's about a shift in mindset. India is signaling that it's no longer in the phase of proving itself to global powers. Instead, it's positioning itself as one of the powers ready to stand tall without validation from Washington. The shock came not just from the refusal, but from the confidence behind it. India didn't beg for adjustments, didn't stall negotiations, didn't soften the blow. It was a clear, unapologetic decision. For Washington, that must have felt like an ego hit. For the world, it was a signal that something fundamental is changing. Suddenly, analysts, journalists, and leaders around the globe started asking, if India can say no, who's next? Could this inspire other nations to resist pressure and craft their own independent paths? That's where the ripple starts. A single rejection turning into a wave of reconsideration for how countries deal with the U.S. And let's not forget the symbolism here. India has long been seen as a nation that balances carefully between East and West. Saying no to the U.S. isn't just about one deal. It's a declaration that India isn't afraid to step out of America's shadow. It's choosing to define itself not by who it sides with, but by what serves its own long-term interests. That kind of self-assurance is rare in global politics, and it's exactly why this no feels like a global earthquake. What the U.S. thought would be a routine partnership move turned into a loud global announcement. India is not to be underestimated, not to be swayed, and definitely not to be controlled. India's rejection didn't happen in a vacuum. It had reasons, layers, and hidden truths behind it. On the surface, the U.S. deal looked like a golden opportunity. Technology transfers, defense cooperation, financial investments, and the kind of global visibility that most nations would jump at. But India isn't most nations. The refusal was more than just a stubborn no. It was a calculated move rooted in history, pride, and strategy. India has learned through decades of global politics that every deal has a price. And this deal, the fine print was simply too heavy. Washington's proposal, though wrapped in promises of partnership, came with strings that would tie India's hands in ways the public wouldn't see at first glance. The message was clear. Short-term gains weren't worth long-term dependence. At the heart of this rejection lies India's determination to protect its sovereignty. Think about it. This is a country that fought tooth and nail for independence, endured colonial exploitation, and has spent the last 7 decades building a sense of self-reliance. The memory of being controlled by outside powers is still fresh in its political DNA. So, when a superpower arrives with a partnership that demands too much influence over India's future policies, defense strategies, or trade choices, it's not just a deal, It's a threat to independence. And India wasn't about to let that slide. Saying no became less about rejecting America and more about protecting India's right to chart its own path. But here's the twist: India didn't just walk away for defensive reasons, it also walked away because it could. Unlike in the past, India isn't desperate for American aid, weapons, or approval. With its booming economy, a rising global reputation, and deep ties with multiple partners like Russia, Europe, and even parts of the global south, India has options. That freedom of choice gave New Delhi the confidence to reject terms that didn't align with its vision. It's like someone who once had no choice but to accept whatever was offered, suddenly standing tall and realizing they can now say, "I don't need this." This refusal also reflects a deeper strategic mindset. By not locking itself into an American-led framework, India keeps its hands free to balance relationships across the world. It can work with Russia on energy, trade with Europe on technology, and even cautiously engage with China on regional issues, all while maintaining its own independent course. Accepting Washington's terms could have cut off those other opportunities. So India's no wasn't just a rejection. It was a chess move, keeping its future options wide open. What makes this moment so powerful is how it redefines India's global image. Instead of being seen as a developing country eager for favors, India is now signaling that it operates from a place of strength. It won't compromise just to be in America's good books. It won't settle for being anyone's a junior partner. And that's why this decision resonates far beyond the borders of India and the United States. It's not only about what was refused, but why it was refused. Because India is no longer a follower. It's a leader deciding on its own terms. For decades, America has been used to hearing yes. When Washington offers a deal, most nations, whether allies or rivals, at least play along, even if reluctantly. That's the way to being the world's superpower. Countries often fear the consequences of saying no, but this time India didn't hesitate. It delivered a straight rejection, and that stunned not only the White House, but also the entire American establishment. It wasn't just about the deal itself. It was about the symbolism. The U.S. expected deference, maybe even gratitude. Instead, it got defiance. Well, let me tell you, America's ego does not take rejection lightly. The bruising came from the contrast between expectation and reality. In Washington's mind, India was supposed to be a dependable partner, a nation eager to join the American camp against China, eager to enjoy the perks of being close to the world's dominant power. The deal was meant to be a handshake moment, a photo opportunity that proved America could still rally big players to its side. Instead, New Delhi flipped the script, reminding America that India is no follower. That reversal hit the U.S. where it hurts most, its global image of influence. Because when a rising power says a no so publicly, it doesn't just bruise the ego, it exposes vulnerability. Think about the ripple effect inside American politics. Leaders who spent months, maybe years, framing India as a cornerstone of their Asia strategy suddenly found themselves scrambling for answers. Why did India walk away? What did we miscalculate? The refusal became a mirror, reflecting not just India's strength, but also America's growing struggle to control outcomes the way it once did. For a country used to setting the rules, this was a rare and humbling reality check. And it wasn't just humiliation on paper, it was humiliation on the stage of global perception. China, Russia, Europe, and every nation in the global south saw what happened. They watched America extend its hand and saw India pull back. To those who've long felt the weight of U.S. dominance, this was proof that saying no is possible. For Washington, that kind of public defiance wasn't just unexpected, it was damaging. It undercut the aura of invincibility America has carefully cultivated since the Cold War. Now here's the part that really stings. America knows it can't afford to lose India. India is too important economically, strategically, and geopolitically. But the moment you need someone and they don't need you in the same way, that's where the power dynamic shifts. India's rejection didn't just bruise the ego, it flipped the balance. It showed America that its leverage isn't what it used to be. No amount of promises, pressure, or political spin can erase the fact that India chose to walk away. So the bruise here isn't just emotional, it's structural. The U.S. is forced to reckon with a new world where it can't automatically command loyalty, where allies might prioritize their own sovereignty over America's agenda. And that's the real shock. Because once the aura of invincibility cracks, others start noticing. The bruise becomes a scar, and the scar becomes a permanent reminder. America's days of unquestioned authority are slipping away. When India turned down America's deal, the shockwaves didn't stop at Washington. They rolled across the globe, reaching Beijing, Moscow, Brussels, and beyond. Every capital city was suddenly paying closer attention, because this wasn't just one country saying no to another. It was a major power refusing the world's strongest player. And when that happens, everyone else starts recalculating their own strategies. It's like a rock dropped in a pond. The ripples spread outward, hitting shores far away. And the ripples from India's decision are shaking up alliances in ways that no one could ignore. Take China, for example. Beijing has always viewed India as both a rival and a potential counterbalance to U.S. influence in Asia. The moment India pushed back against Washington, China's leadership had to take notice. Was this India signaling it doesn't want to be trapped in an American-led alliance against China? Or was it simply proving that it can't be controlled by anyone? Either way, China sees opportunity. If India isn't fully in America's corner, that opens space for Beijing to maneuver. Don't think for a second that China won't try to exploit that gap, whether through trade, regional diplomacy, or strategic negotiations. Now let's look at Russia. Moscow has long considered India one of its closest partners, especially in defense and energy. For Russia, America's failed deal is like a quiet victory. It reinforces the idea that India still values independence and doesn't want to be locked inside a Western framework. That gives Moscow breathing room. It means that even in an era of sanctions and isolation, Russia can still count on India as a reliable partner. And believe me, that kind of reassurance is priceless to the Kremlin. Europe, too, is watching. Countries like France and Germany have been building stronger ties with India, hoping to balance their own dependence on the U.S. Seeing India resist American pressure sends a signal. India isn't afraid to pick and choose its partnerships. For Europe, that's encouraging. It means India might be open to deeper cooperation with them outside of America's shadow. And that possibility alone reshapes how global alliances could form in the coming decade. But perhaps the most important ripple is felt in the global South. Smaller nations in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, countries that often feel bullied or pressured by larger powers, are taking notes. If India, with its rising influence, can stand up to the U.S. and still thrive, maybe they can too. This rejection becomes an example, a precedent. It proves that saying no is not only possible, but it can even elevate a nation's status. That's where the ripple becomes a wave. Others emboldened to follow India's example, carving out more independence in their own foreign policies. So when people call India's decision a rejection, they're underestimating it. This was more than a diplomatic move. It was a signal, a flare shot into the sky, telling the world that the balance of power is shifting. Old alliances are being questioned, new alignments are being explored, and a global realignment is quietly unfolding. And all of it began with one word: no. The biggest question after India's bold rejection isn't just why it happened, but what it means moving forward. Because one and no can echo for years if it changes the way nations see themselves and each other. And make no mistake, this decision wasn't just about one deal, one moment, or one power struggle. It was about reshaping the future of how the world worked. India is no longer playing defense, no longer scrambling to prove it belongs at the big table. It's now pulling out its own chair and writing its own rules. And that shift, that's what will define the next era of global politics. For the U.S., this is a warning bell. America must now realize that old strategies won't work forever. The age of superpower dominance, where deals were handed down and others fell in line, is fading. If Washington wants to keep India close, it will need to treat New Delhi as an equal partner, not a junior sidekick. That means listening more. Dictating less and accepting that influence doesn't automatically mean control. If the U.S. fails to adapt, it risks losing India's trust completely. And once lost, that's not easy to win back. For India, the future looks even more interesting. By rejecting America's offer, New Delhi has shown it has the confidence to stand alone when needed. That doesn't mean it will isolate itself. It means it will engage the world on its own terms. It can strengthen ties with Russia on defense, expand trade with Europe, work with Africa and Asia on development, and still cooperate with the U.S. where interests align. In other words, India is building a future where it isn't tied down by one alliance, but elevated by many. That flexibility makes it one of the most unpredictable and therefore powerful players in global affairs. Now think about the broader impact. Other countries will study this moment as a blueprint. They'll see that India didn't collapse after rejecting the U.S. Instead, it gained more respect. That lesson could embolden nations across Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia to break free from one-sided partnerships. Slowly, the world could move toward a more multipolar system where no single power dictates the game. India's rejection might be remembered as one of the sparks that lit that transformation. And finally, let's talk about symbolism. History remembers bold moments, decisions where leaders choose principle over pressure, independence over convenience. India's no will be remembered not just as a refusal, but as a declaration of intent, a statement that India has arrived, and it will no longer be defined by what others want from it. Instead, it will be defined by what it wants for itself and the billions of people it represents. That kind of clarity doesn't just shape one country's future, it reshapes the world's.